I was going to pick up a few things that we had just heard off in the distance once or twice. One was, one of those kids that rode through here on a car route was mentioning that a more expansive response to the question of how do you do anything? And by anything now, I'm referring to something specific, that the whole idea in life, that the question, you can start off as always at the very crude level as though it were between two people. But the question, even the rhetorical question, if you can get a little more subtle, right quick, then a person might do themselves. But the question about how do you do something in particular. And from a more expansive view, the response to how do you do anything is the same response as that would be proper to the question of how do you do everything. That there is no difference between the anything question and the everything question. Now the more refined parts that I was going to try and insinuate have to do with, well, first off, this is simply another way of noting, you might note, that the universal is always, at all times, dominating the local. That is, whatever reality might be outside of your reality, no matter who you are, because you're not flawed. We'll assume that you're a middle class, middle age, part your hair in the middle, your brain split in two, and you walk on first your left foot and then your right foot. So assuming all that, your reality is just as good as the next person. But we're talking about a form of local reality. We're talking about a form of the difference between what you are and what you know and what you're not and what you don't know. Remember, the difference is everybody else and everything else. Put another way, would you please, all locals add up to the universal. And so you've got to note that whatever it is, whatever it might be symbolically, metaphorically, or even legitimately, tangibly, that the universal is always going to be completely in control, dancing forward to the local reality. This does not mean, however, that individual people, that ordinary consciousness and intelligence has any conception. It seeps out like a damp basement in ideas of gods, religions, supernatural. But you need to keep this in mind if this is going to make any more technicolor sense tonight. That quite simply, that the universal is always in firm control under all conditions of local reality. That something has got you by the goobers. Something has you by the mind. No matter what your mind is, that has no bearing whatsoever of how much knowledge, sophistication, travel, experience is in your mind. That you are still dealing with local conditions, your conditions, not right or wrong, but your conditions. And they are always at the absolute mercy of the universal conditions. Or put perhaps even a little more walked up is, you can say that the universal always is consuming the local. Now looked at in that way, can we jump to the idea of thinking as opposed to knowledge, or revolutionist thinking as opposed to ordinary thinking, new thinking as opposed to old thinking, whatever that all signifies. And then note that new thinking would always be engaged, would always result in you having thought up, as an eat up, that you would think up all that you have already thought about whatever it was. Whew. Try it again. That new thinking, whatever that would be, that new thinking would always think up whatever you had already thought. Anyone who dozed off for a split second, we have not changed from where we started, that the answer to how do you do anything in particular, which will always be a local matter, that the response of how do you do anything in particular is actually the same response as how do you do everything. That the answer to any local question, obviously, has got to be contained in any, if there was such a thing, universal answer. If there was a new kind of thinking, a way in which you could use your brain, a way in which you could analyze the energy that's referred to as they're pleased to do in the city, as information, knowledge, to process that in such a way that was not limited to local conditions, that is, it was not limited to your brain thinking it, then whatever it was you could think outside that, you understand, would have already thought up everything that you could think. The local is always under the absolute control, is being consumed at all times by the universal. And so if you could think in another way, whatever that might be that we're inferring, then it would have taken care of all questions, at least in that area, to make it reasonable to talk about. Once you have, in some new way, some absolute new way, of course not talking about drugs, alcohol, as they also talk about imagination. We're talking about the actual brain working in a different manner, working from a different position, taking into account more than spatial, even four-dimensional reality. Then that kind of thinking, once you have been able to do that in regards to some matter, something that caught your attention, then everything that is possibly pertinent about that, you have thought. Do I smell people awaiting a punchline? That's why I had to go through the dramatics. Since we don't have a drummer to give me a rim shot that was the end of the joke. All right. No, I can give you a punchline beyond that if you want one. How about all the times that you have laughed, responded, on the basis of that which you understand you shouldn't talk about? And a little more subtle with that which you actually understand. Real understanding produces, if you recall from last time, real insouciance. That is, you wouldn't think to mention it. A lot of you laugh about that. A lot of you go, you don't see. If you have thought in some non-local manner about something, why would you ever think about it again? Much less have anything to say about it. You have thought it all. And it's nothing to analyze. You don't sit around, and enough of you have been through this, you just, I will take the blame that it was my faulty description, which is meaningless because nobody's ever described it before, so you can't call it faulty, and I resent that. Not enough to mention it. But see, you can't call it a faulty description when it's the world's first description. Yes, I can. Now I've heard it, I call it faulty. Did you pay to get in here, kid? Try it again. Whatever new thinking would be, a new area of the brain, a new neural site, that there you could pop up some neurons as though it were a new reconnoiterer. And a scout looks out and sees, no longer limited to the three-dimensional landscape, and sees some area that we're talking about, doesn't matter what, sees, and then results in what you normally refer to just as thinking. You think about whatever it is, and it is now from a more complex view. It's as though, if you want another way, that you have gone into at least, let's say, a world, another level of, leave us say 5 dimensions. And you look back upon that, which at best always appeared to be limited to 4 dimensions, and therefore you see, you're able to think about it in a way that is ultimately indescribable. But what you see now has consumed. It has done every possible dance step with that matter, just like that. Nothing to talk about, no argument, no analyzation, not, well, let's see. I can't pretend I'm the world's greatest brain. I can't say that I've thought about every possible aspect of this. And of course, if you have any, did you say any, inclination to do that, then you are correct, as always. That's the wonderful thing about living in the city. You are always correct. Even when you're wrong, you're correct. Because if you say, well, even though I do not engage in sham humility, And even though I now have no doubt, or I suspect that I am beginning to have extraordinary insights into the working of life and blah, 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 I am not prepared to say out of hand that I have thought and considered every possible facet, question, possibility of this area. Not me. And if you have any inclination, I've already been through that. Any? Yes, any. Any inclination. If your brain even starts that whole little scenario I just did, such as, what was the first word? Even though, if you go that far, then you're right. You don't have to finish it. Don't make me go through it again. In other words, if you say, I can't believe, I'm not going to be so presumptuous as to say that I have thought everything about that, you are right. Because you did not think about it through new thinking. You did not get a non-local view, because if you do, it's gone. It has been consumed. You have literally no way to talk about this, because if you've got any question, when I say this again, if any voice in you that you still seriously entertain says, well, now that's got to be symbolic because that can't be true, then you're right. That is, you have never experienced it, and it can't be proven, but I'm going to say it. If you think in that way, new thinking about something, you have thought it has consumed every possible pertinent thought about it. There is nothing else to think about it. Yes, but you're right. You see? That's the wonderful thing about such a sloppy, organized activity as this, is that if you indeed, for the benefit of the children and some of the people from out of town, you attempt to make some even ephemeral dogmatic statement that, well, once you can think in a certain way, like, you know, this unusual way, then there's nothing else to think about something. Yeah. How straightforward and emphatic can you be? And someone, a reasonable person, who just stepped in from the rain, goes, yes, but, then, you know, they're right. Whenever you say yes, but, then you're right. Now, you just don't need to go any further. It's not a debate. It's not a tug of war. And I don't mean, of course, between you and I. It's between you and this kind of stuff, between thinking some other way. Because if something in you goes, well, that sounds right, but, then you're right. There's no sense. Wait, you know, save your time. You don't have to stand up and ask for the interlocutor or whatever they call him. Wait a minute, may I reply to my worthy opponent? Of course, we're talking about up in here. May I reply? His statement sounded all right, but I've got something I'd like to add. I believe that I can shoot logical holes in that argument. Save your breath. If you were inclined to just raise your hand that you want the floor to respond, you win. You always win. Thus is the great benefit. Thus, in a sense, is the love, the great affection life has for all local reality. Why else do you think you have it? You know, the rest of the people in the world, they're continually, throughout history and up till today, still debating, arguing, and sometimes even writing their arguments on those little 120 grams worth of lead, and they put their argument on a 44 mic. They're still arguing about, wait a minute, there's something wrong with life because everybody has got their own slightly askewed view of everything. Even things that are obviously true, such as we should all be Jews or Christians or Albanians. I mean, as obvious as that is to all of us Jewish Albanians, now we are. Can you believe that there's some Slavs right over that hill that think that we should be rotisserans? And somebody in the crowd says, I think you mean Rotarians. And the Albanians, well, it's no offense, but you don't know how far they are behind. They tried to set up a place to have some bingo and serve drinks on Sunday. And so they set up a cow lodge. And somebody had to come in, somebody just passing through from Greece, and says, I think you mean you're trying to set up like a moose lodge or an elk lodge. So, oh, you shouldn't laugh. You gotta... Don't any Albanians write me? Especially that. Where were we? Well, if we're going to play geography, let's try it. How about this? I hadn't changed the subject. The answer to Paris would be the answer to France. And explaining the step explains the dance. How about that? I don't think I'm going to dwell on this much more because I can make it more and more subtle, and it's like mashing out a crepe and make it wider and wider and thinner. And it's not to make some comment about pseudo or even real, if there's such a thing, transcendental experiences, not from the ordinary view. But it does have to do with the fact that you are continually engaged in conversation with yourself. And of course, sometimes it replays itself that you're apparently asking other people, how do you do a certain thing? And we're not talking about just how do you set the timing on a car. How do you do something, and how do you do hem stitch? But it's these continual questions about how should one live? How should one behave? How should one feel under these conditions? The great secondary world of man. There are the continuing questions that people are doing apparently inter-person, like how can I quit smoking? How can I do so-and-so? And then internally is, of course, the spark plug of this. And the response, not the response in life, because the response in life is always something specific. It's always a local response, because if you're ordinary, it seems to be a local problem. You say, how can I quit smoking? I am so tired of coughing and spitting up blood and people avoiding me, and I keep trying, and you blah, blah, blah. And you ask somebody, how do you do it? And if you don't ask somebody, then you go and you ask a clinic, or you ask a physician. You contact the National Spitting Up Blood Society. But you apparently are asking, how do you do something in particular? I mean, what else would you ask? And you expect on the local level, which you are well within your rights to say the least, you expect a specific answer. You do not ask someone, how do you control your temper? And someone says, well, get some of that anti-nicotine gum. And you say, no, we changed the subject. You were... All right, how do you quit smoking? Well, count to 10. See, and people get confused when you try to deal with them. Didn't confuse you, though, did it? A local problem has got to have a local response. How do I do so-and-so? The expansiveness of which I, at the onset, tried to hint at, has to do with there is an answer in the secondary sense, in the secondary world, to everything. And it's the same answer as it is to how do you do anything. Now, did you like the answer to Paris is the answer to France? Of course, I'm assuming, since I made up that rhyme, that you understand that we're representing metaphorically that, in this case, that Paris and France both represent some sort of question. But the answer on a more expansive level, not a local level, because a local level would be insane. It'd be the same as saying, how do you quit smoking? Count to 10 and you get over it. How do you quit smoking? Well, is it, are you using carburation or do you got fuel injector? The local problem has got to have a local response. That's the way the world operates. But if you can think outside the local level, if you can think in a place to where you are not the center of the universe, having nothing to do with sham humility again, but to where you, what you think is not the center, that Saul is not here any longer, that is not a local question, then any question that you might believe that you should be entertaining as to how do I do anything in particular, forget it. There's only one real question, that's how do I do everything? Which is just another way of saying, how can I think in a different place? How can I think outside the 3- and 4-dimensional limits? You could say part of the trickiness, especially of trying to describe it, if you did look, as I started to say, that if we're talking about a 5D state, you can intellectually do this. In a 5D state, there would be no operational difference between up and down, height and breadth. Went too far, didn't I? Trying to help. But of course, we've already covered that. All problems are caused by someone attempting to help. At least you got to admit, if I'm going to, set up a firing squad and shoot everybody else, at least I'll go join in. No, I won't. I just said that to distract you. In a 5D state, anything, I used up and down, height, width, and breadth, trying to get you to see the most tangible, the most concrete aspects of ordinary existence. 4D world, including time. If now, and everything's right here, nothing weird, nothing spooky, Rod Serling is still splitting up blood somewhere, so it's not his theme song. But right quick, we expand this in all possible directions, and then around the corner, and let us assume that we are now thinking from a 5D position, looking at this same thing, including you. And you look at it, do you understand then there is no operational difference between anything going on in the 3D world? Which in the 3D world is matters of life and death. To say there's no difference between up and down, somebody can say, well, I've had philosophical thoughts like that when I used to eat those strange mushrooms out in the Southwest. No. It's not philosophical, it's not metaphorical. But first you got to realize, in this world, to say there's no difference between up and down has got to be metaphorical. If it's not, and you believe it, you belong in a tree. It could be a matter of life and death where this is up and down. If you're a pilot, whether you're confused and you're mountain climbing, you understand that. The difference between up and down can be absolute a matter of life and death. But the very things that would be of inescapable importance at one level, the 4D world, if you now expand this in every possible direction and then went around the corner and we made it to a 5D world and you looked at the very things that are life and death here, such as the difference between up and down, when you see this contained, that all localities are contained within a universal, then that even which is absolutely a matter of life and death is dysfunctional. It is operationally indistinct from any other possibility in that lesser dimension, or in those lesser dimensions. I went so far as to stick my foot in it again, go in there to try and remind you again that anything that can be thought in a new place that is not local has instantaneously thought everything that can be thought about that at the old level. So there's nothing else to say. And by that, I don't mean just a shrug and a dramatic like, well, once you know it, you don't have to talk about it. It's beyond that. There is nothing to talk about. It's not that, well, I don't guess I'll talk about it anymore now that I understand it. I don't have to. I don't have anything to prove. It's not that. You wouldn't even think about it anymore. In case anybody ever wonders why these great old ideas of secret knowledge and conspiracies and everyone that you ever find out in life doesn't ever go anywhere. Because if there were, a Hansel and Gretel conspiracy neurologically, and they went out leaving breadcrumbs like everybody else, then the real Hansel and Gretel didn't leave any breadcrumbs. Or if they did, they fell into another dimension. In other words, you can't track where this was. And everything you can track, if you got any potential to be the big bad wolf or even a basket full of goodies, and you track any track, and you follow any track left, it's going to be 3 and 4 dimensional. That's why you people ended up here. Except for those of you that are just getting in out of the rain. Because any track that's available, that is any local reality that says, even if it says, yes, we may be local, but we're in touch with non-local people. That is, if you're trying to find some sort of conspiratorial secret, startling knowledge, and you live in Ohio, then the trail obviously is going to lead somewhere toward the subcontinent, Tibet, Kathmandu, But, see, nobody ever thinks about this. The people that live in Pakistan and India that ever get carried away with such as this, they start looking at the trail. You just don't see them over here as often because the economy has not been equal to yours. It seems like the trail leads. It couldn't. Rio, Akron. The point being, and this is not simply a comment on the state of affairs out there, it's in your own nervous system. Literally in the DNA, in the genetic code in people to try and think somewhere in you, which is the whole idea of secret knowledge. This is the basis of God's, but especially all this great idea of secret knowledge, some kind of hidden key, little piece of something if I can get hold of it. It's in here, it's not out here. Nobody made that up. It didn't come with Moses or Buddha or Abraham. But people keep tracking it back that obviously there's been people. I'm quoting them, I say obviously. And people had some extraordinary insight into the nature of life, and they had to have gotten it somewhere. In other words, it arose out here. Even if the gods sent it down, great cosmic forces, they sent it down, some kind of bird, they threw down a rock with a note on it, or they said, hey down there. But it actually was in some sort of line. It came from the great cosmic forces or the Big Bang itself. It's sending out subtle messages. But the point is, there's a track. That's what your intelligence tells you because there's a track in your intelligence. Yes? Is that true? How did you get here? I don't have any DNA, I'm sorry. We were too poor to afford genes. No, you weren't. And so there was a track. And if you're going to find anything, even if it appears to be extraordinary, that there's knowledge that probably just nobody knows on this planet but one person right now. Okay. Then you got to find that person. There's got to be a track. You're talking about this. This is the whole idea that I was trying to get you to see again last time. The audience and the performance. There's got to be at least one other, the audience can be one other person. The audience can be one other neural connection. And so your idea that there's some kind of knowledge, I keep trying, I want to scratch my brain, I keep reading books, I'm taking drugs, and there's a track somewhere, I just can't find, there's a clue. Yeah. Where is it? Yeah. Where is it? God, if I just had the money to get, you made a joke. If I could get to Kathmandu, I'd either find the secret information or perhaps Bob Seger would be there. But the whole idea that there is a track going somewhere, there is a trail, I've just got to be able to unravel it. I've got to be able to backtrack. Forget about my finger. I mean, traveling to Pakistan, to India, to anywhere. What you're talking about is you're trying to go back down the genetic line. And if you find a way to do it, which an ordinary person is not, quote, physically going to be able to do it, but they attempt to do it out here. If they can find a trail of any kind, if it took them 45 years of crawling through dusty libraries in London, Paris, Ankara, Peshawar, buying books, going without food, tracking down manuscripts, and they spent 45 years, 46 years, and they finally find something. It was at the bottom of this big old stack in a used bookstore. Just outside the suburbs of Marrakesh. And the guy didn't even know it was there. And you found it. And there it is. A name. A house address in the desert. And you just know that's what you're looking for. You understand? I assume that we're all grown-ups and there's nobody that would go this far because I know all of you have had some feeling like that. We're not laughing at that. Here is the funny part, which nobody can laugh at unless you understand it. Oh, you can laugh and be a smartass. But the funny part is, you did that, and that could be the climax of an ordinary person's life. Finally, 46 years, and there it is. That's not it. I mean, that could be the climax of the person's life. That could be their hobby. God bless them, figure of speech. I'm certainly not going to say anything to such people, and you wouldn't either. But if you can find any trace that you go, that's it. You know the punchline. You know it's not it. This leaves no trace. Because if you can get to where you're looking at right now, you forget all about it. The universal, the seeing it from a new place, eradicates, and this doesn't cover it, but that's why I kept saying, backing up here when I said I was through with it. Once you see it, it's not that it's not just a matter of, well, now that I've seen it, I don't have to think about it. That's about the best you can say to the audience of all ordinary intelligence. But it's not that, well, now that I've seen it, once you see Rome, you don't have to go around talking about it. It's not that. And it's not even covered to say, well, you forget Rome. Because ordinary intellect says, well, now you're actually symbolic in your reference. Because that's not really it. It's just that when you see something from a more universal view, when you see something through new thinking, it has thought up every possible, potentially meaningful aspect. And so you never think about it. There are no breadcrumbs left out here. There are no breadcrumbs left in here because it never went there to start with. And if you do find breadcrumbs, even if they seem subtle, even if they seem misdirective, which of course makes it more interesting to some people, I just know I'll get there. If there's any track of it, you're not going to get there. You'll get somewhere maybe, and if you're ordinary, you may enjoy it. And you may be able to write a book. But you're not going to get anywhere if you can find any trace of it, because you're going backwards. It's you being in the audience and saying, God, I wish I was on stage. God, I wish I was on stage when Buddha was here, or Swami X. And if you keep following it, someday you'll get on stage. And then you look out there and you think, well, where's my audience? More symbolism. I'll call it that. Or you go on stage and you go, God, what a bummer. What a disappointment. Or you go on stage and you go, this ain't the stage I had in mind. It only took you 46 years. All right, I'm definitely going to change the subject. You have to push a button, see. All right. How about, let's consider another area. In this area, now something a little easier to, let's discuss now RICs, R-I-C, real imaginary concepts. No. Of course, I lied to you. I'm not really changing the subject all that much, but RICs, real imaginary concepts. This would be the kind of fuel that you would have to use, or that you would be using in new thinking, or as once we were calling it, if you'll all catch back up, thinking as opposed to knowledge. The process, the open-ended thinking as opposed to conclusion-oriented, reasonable sentence with an object after the verb, knowledge. So one way to describe this kind of energy would be, and it's not just to be producing some sort of non sequitur, but it would be a kind of real, imaginary concepts, such as, some of them we've already used the terms lately, but a real imaginary concept would be such a thing as an open-ended conclusion. I guess I may have used that, and we've talked about it enough that some of you are not going to bat an eye. Of course, the danger is some of you people, I talk about something about the flying pig that I left in the back room, and you'd nod like, yeah, well, go ahead. Or just before I got on stage, I met an honest politician. You're going to go, well, okay, yeah. What's the punchline? So you people are getting so blasé. And some of them, to change the pronunciation, some of you are getting blazy. You're on fire, kid. A real imaginary concept, though. And there's a reason I do that, not just to play with words again, but it would be such thing as an open-ended conclusion, which is obviously impossible in the 3D world. But remember, in the 3D world, if you got to a higher world, that which is absolute life or death, if not physically, intellectually, such as there can't be an open-ended conclusion here. There can't be. Now, 2 and 2 cannot equal more than one thing, or this whole secondary world would fall apart. But remember, as we already established to your satisfaction. Remember, we voted on it not 10 minutes ago. From a higher dimension, that which seems to be of absolute, unambiguous importance, certainty in a 3D world, in any lesser world. If we're talking about a 10-dimensional view into a 5-dimensional world, the things in a 5-dimensional world that are without question this and this and this and this and this would no longer be operationally distinct. They would be swallowed by some other greater, more complex distinction and difference. Thus, the idea of a real imaginary concept is not just playing with words, but it's not true. It cannot be at this level that there could be an open-ended conclusion. A conclusion is to cut off the end. A conclusion is to bring it to some satisfactory ending. The idea, not just a something out there, not a process, not an action, but the process in here is the ultimate, because this is what, of course, is fueling and driving the secondary world out there. But a new kind of thinking, you would be using a kind of fuel that would be an open-ended conclusion, which, as I admitted, I misdirected you, because that is getting close to what would be a kind of new thinking about something wherein it has consumed, or for those of you with PhDs from southern universities, the new thinking has ate up anything else that you possibly could think. Everything you've ever thought, and if you're getting that good and you like this, then what you and all other local thinking has thought about that. That's why you can't ever think about it again. That's why you don't resist it, you just never think about it, because now the difference between what you know and what you don't know, remember that equation, the difference between what you know now and what you don't know is what everybody else knows. That's the difference. But once you have spanned that gap, you never think about it anymore. You don't not think about it. You don't resist thinking about it. Who, assuming that you do not eat something that would disagree with you, who eats something and then continues to think about it? It's over. There's nothing to think about. It's not possible to think about it. If it was possible to think about it, it would be, when you looked in the dictionary under stupidity, there would be you thinking about something that you had already eaten. This is what I was hoping that some of you might see would be not untowardly referred to as open-ended conclusion. It won't fly in the city. But consider, for you to understand something in such a way, to really understand it so as to produce real insouciance, that you think about something new to where your dimensional view of it consumes absolutely any possibility of pertinence at a lower level, then in that sense, it has reached a satisfying conclusion with you. And yet if I were somewhere down your nervous system, playing some kind of Hollywood science fiction, I jumped into your brain, I went, that's strange, that new thinking you did about something, and now you never think about it. And so in a sense, even though you don't think about it, you came to a conclusion. And stretching three-dimensional reality, and your own brain went, you're right. It still would be open-ended. And we're not talking about the ordinary level, because the ordinary level, if you go back and talk about it again, and when someone says, are you still dressing up in your wife's clothing and hanging around at bus stops? And let's say that you haven't for a while. And you go, no! Remember, if you say that you've absolutely stopped doing something, you haven't. That's just it. So at the ordinary level, if I played this game in your brain and you went, yeah, then it would be a conclusion. But remember, we went into another dimension. It would be that it has reached a satisfactory conclusion with you, but I'm stretching reality now. But if I said, all right, does that mean that the process along that area in some way has stopped? This is all impossible. But your brain then would say, nah, it's still open-ended. In other words, the distinction between up and down is moot. It is dysfunctional. It is not operational. It's just meaningless from a more complex level. Therefore, to say that you would be dealing with the kind of fuel of open-ended conclusions is not simply some sarcastic or sardonic non sequitur. It can be both. From a more complex view, there would be no operational distinction between a conclusion and an ongoing process or an ongoing inquiry. All right, try it another way. Okay. You could call the kind of fuel, the kind of energy that would be involved with non-local thinking, new thinking, you could look at as being a kind of flexible certainty, which you can probably make up as quick examples as I can now that I've given you hints about Albania and Paris and Bob Seger. I mean, I bet by now any of you can pull this together and see where the conspiracy lies. I mean, just ask yourself, why did Capitol Records let his contract expire? All right, well now, yeah, all right, now I give you the hint, and of course then it's just one step to say, why is it that Capitol Records has adamantly refused to open up an office in Albania? But a flexible certainty is just a slight spin, at least, on an open-ended conclusion, because a certainty has got to be certain. It has got to be stable, it has got to be rigid, but they can be flexible certainties. I wasn't going into it tonight, but even I could use that description, and some of you maybe just do it on your own. Even at the ordinary level, humanity is engaged with that. It's why we're inclined at times to, around here, refer to the appearance of certainty, or the apparently satisfying conclusion to sentences. Because actually, the secondary world works on the basis of a kind of flexible certainties. Just people don't think about it. They cannot think about it. It would be contrary to the continued health of the secondary world. But people do operate on that basis. Life itself, like any kid. You know, all kids are the Pillsbury Doughboy. You know, it's only old people when they get old, they get real rigid and you can't punch them and there's some softness. And so they're all kind of flexible. Well, for instance, in life people say things such as, all right, I've had enough of this. I'm not going to stand here around this party or this gathering and have people talk about my religion that way. And suddenly somebody stands up that's about 8 feet tall and says, oh yeah, what are you going to do about it? And you go, well, I think you misunderstood me. I was just a joke. Right? Or you stand up to make a great speech and rah, 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 right in the middle, and somebody laughs and they say, you mispronounced that word. And you go, I was wondering whether you'd catch that because I did that on purpose to see if you were awake. There is a kind of flexible certainty in life. Listen, I put up with all this kind of crap from you I'm going to take. If you're not going to be home on time, and I see you, I know you're out fooling around somewhere. You're going to keep doing this. I'm going to leave. And that person says, hit the road. Where are you going to go? No. All right, I'll give you one more chance. At any rate, you do it. There is a kind of flexible certainty in life. Give me liberty or give me death. And you hear the click of a pistol. You say, wait a minute, let me rephrase that. That's just the way. But of course, I am now trying to get you to see on a more specific, a non-ordinary level, that it would be going on more so in a specific manner that you could see yourself, that there is a kind of flexible certainty. Put it, well, as always with this sort of thing, as you reach a point of diminishing returns, trying to verbally describe that which is verbally eating itself up. But it has to do, a flexible certainty would be, since you all laughed once or twice, would be that kind of Kairoot, saying that real understanding, whatever the hell that means, real understanding produces real insouciance. Not fake insouciance, but real insouciance. Do you not see that that'd be a kind of flexible certainty? It's not the basis on which you'd be operating if you could do it, but it would be on the basis sort of this. I'm going to go ahead and do it in words that you would. Now, we're talking about this ordinary stuff that you already laughed at. If somebody's saying, wait a minute, you can't talk about the Dodgers when I'm around like this. The guy stands up and he pulls open his coat and you see a 38. He says, says who? You go, wait, that wasn't me, that was somebody else. You know, you laugh like, so he stayed alive. So it's not that. But I'm going to have to use the same kind of words right quick. From a more manifold view, this new thinking would be, in a sense, you wouldn't be doing it this specifically, but in a sense, would you be telling you that you see something, you go, you know, to hell with the Brooklyn Dodgers. Or, I see the point of that. And just a split second later, an hour later, doesn't matter when, your same perception goes, that wasn't it. Or that's not the end of it. In other words, you're saying, now I see something. You wouldn't do it, but you'd be, now I see something. I see something extraordinary. And a few minutes later, you realize, oh, you didn't say it right. Except on that basis, you no longer are playing to an audience, and so there's nobody to laugh or to go, aha, boy, you put your foot in it again, you smart ass. You should be more humble. In other words, I see something now, I understand it. In a few minutes, you say, you didn't understand it completely. Your thing is, so what? Now I understand it better. That's not what goes on, but that was a flexible certainty that, now I know. And a few minutes later, you realize you don't know. And you don't give a damn. So that's the unfair advantage, remember? You can have two opposing armies. That's what Kairoot said, but then forget armies out there. It still works out there. But we're talking about in here. Look at two opposing armies, the audience and the performer. That is what you try to think and what's listening to you think. You're talking to yourself. Expanded a little bit, attempted new area of thinking opposed to the old knowledge. They can appear to be equally, of equal strength, equal provisions, equal armaments, but they are not equal if one of the armies don't give a goddamn. Now, that's true out there, but we're talking about in here now. That is getting closer to a flexible certainty. Aha, now I know. And then internally you realize, that's not it. None of this happens in this way, but your attitude will be, well, so what? There is nobody to say, gotcha, but there is nobody to go, ha, ha. It's what you get for being sure. You were sure on the basis of flexible certainties. I keep saying that this sounds, obviously, it's not because I say it, that it's, but every three-dimensional view is irrational, illogical, etc., but just really off to the side now. Does anybody also, can you picture that is impossible? As all these kind of descriptions are, these are still, we're just taking a different approach, but these are still the descriptions. The long-range description, not just the thumbnail sketches, but the long-range descriptions of every religion's gods. A bunch of unpredictable, ill-tempered, illogical, undependable, flexible. Even when they say, by God, I'm not going to put up with any more of this stuff. I'm going to, this city down here, those people are driving me nuts. I'm going to kill them all. And this one voice, somebody from the audience, a neural connection goes, wait a minute. What if there's one person down here sane? Well, that wasn't the story. God, it's been so long since we were all Christians and Jews. The neuron stands up, a guy stands up and says, wait a minute, before you do us all in, what if there were 12 people down here that's not as dumb as you think? And he goes, no, he just said, I've had it. I'm just going to destroy that city. And suddenly a voice says, wait, what if there's 12 people down here not as bad as you think? And he goes, okay. All right. If you can come for 12, I'll change my mind. Hey, now is that a God or what? Are we talking about a strong performer? And he comes out on the stage that he has created, if it was a he, and says, well, I'm glad to see everyone here tonight. I thought I'd start off with a little accordion solo. And the crowd goes, Jesus. No. He goes, how about a zither? What if I dance? They say, how about 12 decent ideas? How about 12 pieces of knowledge that are not absolutely locally confined? And this supposedly universal force, says, okay, I'll go with that. I mean, that's enough, but the story doesn't even stop there. Then this neuron goes, not being an absolute dummy, goes, how about 11? And he goes along with that. Huh? What I was saying is, even though I called them insane and impossible of flexible certainties, that is it's not an unfitting description of all of these great gods and deities, which is humanity again, the nervous system, trying to find some trail and trying to picture itself outside the hold of its local DNA line. Everybody is trying to get off trailways and get on Greyhound. Well, let's say half the world. And so they think Greyhound goes to heaven. They think Greyhound is being driven by Allah. And then half the other people are on Greyhound and they won't get on trailways because they think that's where Jehovah is, or Buddha. An open-ended conclusion, a flexible certainty, is the same kind of dream that men put the words in their clothing of calling them guides, secret knowledge, because without knowing it, and they will throw in still the terms of omnipotent, all-powerful. I mean, if there's the Big Bang itself, if anybody knows what's going on, the God, if there's something outside the system that made the system, that's what I want. But they cannot see past their own nervous system, their own local reality, to see that even their dream, or if they say, wait, it's not my dream, in case anybody still wonders about the gullibility, the low level of human intelligence, it's not my dream. I have here the Word of God. Where is that? In this book? Did you know that God wrote that? Oh, yeah. Well, he didn't actually write it, but he told some humans to write down what he was going to say to them. I mean, you were there and saw all this, or you can move back in your DNA. Well, no, but the human said he did. Just, again, any of you that sometimes wonder that you start playing to your own audience internally, that yes, I can see that life is good at times. And I believe life is expanding. And then suddenly you feel like that a Greyhound has run over one of your private parts again. I told you, if nothing else, look back that the heroes, when they're sitting around the coffee, the faculty lounge at MIT, they talk about Magic Johnson. Do you see? Are those that seem to be engaged in more metaphysical affairs trust the Word of God? And you say, where did you get this? Well, these people wrote it down, what God told them. And that's it. Oh, yeah. Of course, it's not just some kind of cheap-ass attack on religion and Bibles and Korans, but notice it is now, or it always has been, but it is now such an intricate part of the nervous system and the secondary world, you would be accused of being just an abject, an unsophisticated, not just an atheist and an unbeliever, but just you're outside the mainstream of being civilized. Now you can say, well, I'm Jewish and therefore I do not believe in the New Testament. Or you can say, well, I'm Muslim and so I have no particular belief system tied to the so-called Holy Bible. That's not even it. It's not an attack on that. But notice, there's no one in the city. There's no one in the main systemic area we call human intelligence that can, in anything approaching objectivity, even approach, even address any question as to, now whoever it is, Muslims, Jews, Christians, that this book here, these words, this is what we have to live by. We don't have to go by our kind of local reality, if you want to call it that. We have something greater. We have something outside of man. We have messages. I mean, they're indirect, but we have messages that originally came directly from the controlling forces, the gods, the deities. And no one, you can't even, it's not an attack. One more time, you understand that. There's no way you can't debate it, and you certainly wouldn't talk to ordinary humanity out there because you're talking to the mainstream of the human nervous system. You're not talking to individuals. But there is no ability for it to even register the question. They cannot deal with this kind of inquiry. I mean, it makes no sense. All they can do is reject it in a polarized, out-of-hand fashion. To say, does anybody ever think that the world is being driven, in the so-called spiritual sense, by these words that are in some way assumed, accepted to be outside, extrinsic to the human nervous system? In other words, humans didn't make up the Old Testament, right? No. Humans wrote it down, but they simply wrote down what God told them to write down. No one can even investigate that. No one can even ask Because the has got to be, if an ordinary person did it, the is going to be a polarized reaction to it. In other words, an attack on it. And it's not an attack. It is part of the human nervous system. But the descriptions, back to where we were, the descriptions of such things as an open-ended conclusion, a flexible certainty, are the same things, as insane as they are put in the terms that I address them in. It is the same description that all religions are using, that the nervous system of man at its cutting edge whenever, 3,000 years ago last night, still are trying to track a trail that would lead, and they always think it's backwards, but anyway, to follow a track that would lead to something outside of local reality. But if you got outside of local reality, you would be faced with, if you could do them both, if you could still be an ordinary person, a three-dimensional creature, and in some way get outside of it, and found God, as they call it, what you would find would be that which would be just as insane, if it could be done, as my imaginary fictitious, real concept of a flexible certainty. If you could pluck the Pope, the world's most learned rabbi, and you could pluck him out of the 3D world and throw him in front of the reality of a more complex reality of what they call God or Jehovah or cosmic forces, and you plopped them in front of it, what they would see, I suggest to you, they would not be inclined to call, it is God. It'd look more to them if I said, what is it? And I got no idea. Now I said, how about this? May I suggest, how about something like a flexible certainty? They'd go, that's it. That's it. I don't know what the hell it means. I can't go back and tell the congregation, but that's it. One minute. All right, one other description. Since you like open-ended conclusion, since we got a great round of applause for our flexible certainty. How about one more even? The kind of fuel that would be in new thinking, the kind of fuel that would be beyond local conditions. Instead of a flexible certainty, how about this? A silly seriousness. All right? That means half a minute, I guess. A silly seriousness. But also note, in conclusion, trusting I have your vote, but in conclusion, notice none of these real imaginary concepts, none of them can exist in the atmosphere of passing judgment on the planet of knowledge. That means no minutes. In fact, it means no minutes. Mother